Welcome to the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast, the show for those who believe life gets better and even sweeter with age. I'm your host, Paul Vogelzang, and today we're diving into the soul-stirring legacy of two soul music giants whose voices, harmonies, and vision shaped the very sound of a generation. We're going to be talking today with Scott Shea, who's written a fantastic piece about Curtis Mayfield and Jerry Butler. If you grew up spinning 45s on your record player or gathered around the radio to hear those smooth, soaring harmonies from Motown and the Chicago Stax scene, all of that great music, then you already know that Mayfield and Butler weren't just voices. They were storytellers, activists, and pioneers of a sound that broke barriers. Together, Curtis Mayfield and Jerry Butler helped shape the golden age of soul music, and their influence continues to inspire generations. But did you know that before the world knew them as soul legends, they were just two young men from Chicago's Cabrini-Green housing projects, united by gospel music, ambition, and a dream of something bigger? Well, today we will uncover the fascinating story of how Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield met, formed the Impressions, the hugely successful band The Impressions, and created hits like the unforgettable For Your Precious Love. We'll also explore why Jerry's path ultimately led him to go solo and how Curtis turned his heartbreak into a revolutionary career that brought soul music into the civil rights music. Joining us today is a regular here at the Not Old Better Show. It's music historian, writer Scott Shea, who's an expert in music history, whose latest article brings these incredible stories to life, from Curtis Mayfield's genius as a songwriter to Jerry Butler's powerful, underrated baritone. We'll reflect on their journey, their struggles, and their lasting impact on American music and culture. This is one for music lovers, the memory keepers, and anyone who remembers the days when a song could soothe your soul and spark a revolution. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, sit back, join us today as we celebrate the legacy of these two legends who reminded us to keep on pushing. Join me in welcoming back to the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast, music historian Scott Shea. Scott Shea, good to see you. Welcome back to the program. Happy New Year, all those things, and congratulations on this wonderful new article we're going to talk about today. All of that.
Thanks, Paul. Happy to be back. I love coming to visit.
Always love to talk about music with you. And this article just caught my attention. I'm talking about the article that you wrote recently titled Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield, Their Forgotten Story. Of course, Curtis Mayfield's name is going to jump right out at everybody. We'll talk about some of Curtis Mayfield's specifics and music and all of that. But let's talk a little bit about Jerry Butler, because I think he was so forgotten, yet he really played a role. He was very influenced by gospel music, as was Curtis Mayfield. I'm interested in kind of how you came upon him. Other than I know you're a music historian, have you always been a fan? Because this name was something that I had to knock on my head and say, yeah, I remember him.
Oh, yeah. I've loved Jerry Butler since I was a kid, man. I mean, that big booming voice of his. And you're right. I mean, Curtis Mayfield is the one who gets the attention because he's kind of gone through all the ages. He's people who don't know soul or black music know Curtis Mayfield, so he just kind of transcends all eras. But, for me, Jerry Butler is one of the greatest soul singers, or even just pop singers of that era. I remember one time sitting with my father-in-law, and he asked me if he could sing like anybody, who would you want to sing like? And I said Jerry Butler, because I just love his voice is so. It's deep it's a pleasant baritone, but it's almost like honey. It's just it's like honey to the ears. And he started off in the late '50s with the Impressions. He's a founding member of Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. Lasted less than a year because he was just so talented, and the people at Chess just wanted to make back then they just loved to pluck a great guy out of a band, a singer like Benny King or Clyde McPhatter when they were both in the Drifters, and they plucked him right out. And there's numerous of other examples, but um Jerry they knew he just had it, and hit it right off the bat. Well, he kind of hit it right off the bat. In my article, you see, it wasn't so much, not really until Curtis Mayfield kind of came back in his fold there. But really had a lot of hits in the early '60s, a little bit of a lull, and then in the late '60s, he just teamed up with Gamble and Huff out in Philadelphia and just lit it on fire again. So he is a journeyman.
Such a great era of music too. I just, I love that. That's all kind of my generation. You talk about Gamble and Huff, Berry Gordy, all the Motown music, all of that stuff. I had to go back and listen to some music though from Jerry Butler, and I just, now it's part of my playlist. I'm just listening to it, but one just jumped right. You talk about this honey baritone voice. For our radio audience, we're going to play some of his music. For our online audience, check out Scott's article. We'll have links. Check out Jerry Butler's music. But let's talk about one song in particular, For Your Precious Love. I mean, that song, it stops people in their tracks even today. Tell us a little bit about that, why that resonates so powerfully.
Well, that was a poem that Jerry wrote in high school. He called it "They Say," and there's a line in there. They say that our love won't grow, but
Yeah.
and that was when he was with the Impressions. That was their lone hit together. Jerry, he and Curtis Mayfield and the three other guys. And it's interesting because it's in the doo-wop genre. If you buy any doo-wop compilation, of popular songs, that's going to be there. But there's really no doo-wop elements in it. But yeah, somehow it embodies the whole genre. It's interesting because there's no refrain, there's no chorus. It's just a poem that they set to music. Richard and Arthur Brooks, who were members of the band at the same time, they were brothers, and they contributed some to it. Jerry never really elaborated on what they actually contributed to, but it's probably one of those deals where they changed a word or two, and he gave him part of the song, just to be a good guy, because he seemed to be at odds with those guys when he was in that band. But it was the song that got them signed to Chess Records. It wasn't Chess. I'm sorry, it was VJ. Got them signed to VJ, but a subsidiary of VJ. It was the last song they sang at their audition for Calvin Carter, who had produced John Lee Hooker and a lot of the blues greats. They're from Chicago, and Chicago's a blues town. So, every song they sang him during the audition, he's like, yeah, it's okay, it's good. Just it doesn't blow me away. Because back then, you had to look good, you had to sound good, and you had to have a song ready to go. So he said to him, just sing me something that you wouldn't sing, that you're embarrassed to sing in front of me. That's just, that you wouldn't sing to anyone else. And they said, well, let's pull out For Your Precious Love. And they went right into it, and it just made the hair on his neck stand up, and it blew him away. And it's funny because at that same time, the Spaniels, who were the kings of VJ Records, hits like Goodnight, Sweetheart, Goodnight, and Stormy Weather, and a few others, they come walking into the studio, and Calvin's like, hey, guys, you got to come over here and sing this song for the Spaniels. And these guys were paranoid because I should say not the Spaniels, but the Impressions were paranoid because there are always stories of these manipulative practices that these record companies would do. They would hide microphones to steal great songs by new artists who were trying to get signed. It's ridiculous to even think of it. They were just young kids. They were, not even in their 20s. Some of them, they're barely out of their teens. And they had no choice, and they sang it for the Spaniels, and the Spaniels loved it. Weren't interested in singing it, but they said, hey, this is great. You guys are going to knock them dead with this. And they sure did. It went to the top Top 12, I think, on the pop charts, and number one on the R&B.
It's fascinating. Wonderful stuff. Always so good to talk to you, Scott Shea. You talk about an artist kind of getting plucked, somebody with some talent's going to naturally get seen and found. What happened to the creative directions for both the Impressions and then Jerry Butler as they kind of both, kind of went on their own?
Well, the problems started right in the beginning when the record was pressed, and they all went to go down and see it. They got some advanced copies of it down at at the the office of VJ Records, and somebody had stamped Jerry Butler and the Impressions on the label. Not just because they auditioned as the Impressions, they didn't audition as Jerry Butler and the Impressions, and it just drove a wedge right between him and the other four guys, even Curtis. They were all kind of, and it's kind of still, it just shows that how young they were, because Jerry had nothing to do with that. It's like, I mean, they were with him all the time. It's not like he called them up and say, "Hey, we want to make it Jerry and the Butler and the Impressions." And Jerry was embarrassed too. But when they would go out on tour, they would be introduced as Jerry Butler and the Impressions, or just Jerry Butler and his group, And the Brooks brothers, they were just not mature enough to handle that. And it just, after 6 months of touring, Jerry's just like, "I've just had enough of this," because they would tour, they would sing, things would get better, and then they would see it in the marquee somewhere or be introduced that way, and it would just elicit all these emotions. So Jerry just decided to call up Ewart Abner over there at VJ Records and say he wanted to go solo, which I think was kind of his the brass at VJ's plan all along. I think they just wanted to kind of divide and conquer, And they really weren't. And it's funny because the Impressions turned out to be the bigger thing in the long run. But they were more interested in just having Jerry, so they let the Impressions record like 3 or 4 more singles, and then they just kind of fizzled, and kind of went on hiatus. And Jerry went on to have a good career, but it wasn't really until Curtis Mayfield was brought in, because Curtis was out of work there for a little while, and Jerry needed a guitarist and called him up, and they teamed up, and that's when they got together on songs like "He Will Break Your Heart," "Moon River," and "Aware of Love," and a few other big hits for Jerry.
Yeah, hard to forget about Moon River, but that's, clearly, a big hit. The music just really lasts. As I say, I went back and pulled some out and listened to it again. And one of the interesting things that you point out in your article, and again, we're going to put links so that our audience can find out all about Scott Shea's recent article. Again, the article is titled "Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield, Their Forgotten Story." And there's a reissue of, it's a 2 CD set, actually, of some of Jerry's music. And it's by it's from Beat Goes On, I believe, Records, a label there in the UK. Tell us a little bit about why this music is so timeless. It's just so powerful. And I would imagine the reissue is going to be a huge success.
Yeah, it's a reissue of some of his first work when he switched to Mercury Records in the mid '60s. That's where he teamed up with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff, and they just haven't seen that they hadn't been reissued yet. So it's just kind of neat to see, or at least not completely. Some of them have songs here and there, and it shows that late '60s change in Jerry's career, where he just really sang these sophisticated soul numbers with these interesting chord progressions. And Gamble and Huff just were really masters at just you know just chord progression and strings. And they work. It's kind of like a precursor to the disco era. You hear those kind of swirling strings and they were really kind of the architects in that, and you really kind of hear it. And you got songs like "Only the Strong Survive" and "Never Gonna Give You Up" and "Western Union Man," and it really gave Jerry's career new life. It's so much different from the stuff he was doing in Chicago on VJ. But again, it's got all his hallmarks on it. It's got his incredible voice. He always has this way of just having this longing, this aching, and it seems almost comes from his heart, that he really conveyed in his music very well. And I do hope that the reissue is a success. At least if you're a Jerry Butler fan, it will be.
Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone, Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not Old Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Scott Shea, music historian, is our guest. Let's talk a little bit about Curtis Mayfield, because so many of us probably, start and stop maybe with Shaft, but there's just so much else going on with Curtis Mayfield. Interestingly enough, I found in my research for our conversation, he was really a pretty good father, I think, with his son. But talk a little bit about the music, from a 60s kind of social standpoint. We think about, People Get Ready. And again, we'll play some of this music for our radio audience, but what an anthem.
Yeah, he grew up in his grandmother's church. It was this kind of weird mix of kind of Southern evangelism and New Orleans kind of voodoo and stuff like that. And they were all his grandmother was a transplant from Mississippi, and in Chicago in the 1940s, there was a lot of Black Southerners who had emigrated there just because of the Jim Crow laws that just really prevented them from doing anything socially, economically, career-wise. There was just no advancement for them. So Chicago just kind of kicked the door open and was very inviting and welcoming to many Southern Blacks. And his grandmother, Jerry Butler's family, came from Mississippi. Curtis's grandmother came from Louisiana. And she set up this church, and it was a very successful church. And in fact, that's how Jerry and Curtis met. They both sang in her choir. So, but she was a lot. She would say things like that, and when she would preach, she'd say things like "People get ready" or "Keep on pushing." She had a good talent for just coming up with these phrases that really stuck with Curtis and inspired him to write. And going into he was inspired by what was going on with Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and so many others, just really had an incredible, almost kind of like a Gandhi approach, just soft, compassionate, way of conveying the social message that he was trying. Like, hey, we're just looking for just an equal shot here. I'm not looking to storm the castle. I'm not looking to turn everything over on its ear. We just want a shot. And his Curtis had a very soft demeanor about it. It's very evident in his music. When you hear people tell stories about him, he's very soft, deliberate with his words. He came across as very meek, but he was also, in the music term, he was very aggressive musically, in terms of his career and how he wanted to move on. He let nothing really stand in his way, and he was almost kind of deceptive in that way. You think, oh, here's this quiet guy, but behind the scenes, he was really working it. But I think that is what made his music, like him and Smokey Robinson, really kind of stand out. Was that just kind of soft, quiet, strong approach to the music, and just powerful messages like, people get ready. It's a civil rights song, but it's also a gospel tune when you listen to it. It's just absolutely, it's all about, the kingdom come, preparing yourself for the kingdom. It's a beautiful song, and it transcends, and it's been covered by, hundreds of artists, from Rod Stewart to the Everly Brothers to so many others. it's just an incredibly powerful song, and still one of my favorites. I remember when I was writing the article, because a lot of times when I'm writing the article, I'll just listen to stuff while I'm writing it,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
it all sounds so new when you do that, and that song's just still moves me.
Yeah, you think about and you use this great term, the equality of the moment, and some of the lyrics inspiring this idea of hope and change. It was a just a tumultuous time, and I think for all of us, we remember some of those songs as being quiet messages of power. And I wonder, do you think Curtis Mayfield and Jerry Butler were aware of some of that going on, even in the background, and were tapping into that whole kind of message?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Jerry talks about it in his autobiography. And he's very outspoken. He later became a politician, a Chicago politician. Kind of put Jerry was never really about that message in the music,
Uh-huh.
but he lived it in his life in politics. But yeah, I mean, Curtis, I don't think songs like "It's All Right," and a few others were really just kind of like a nod and a wink to that movement. But I think that's where he was going, and then it got more overt with "Keep on Pushing" and "People Get Ready" and "Move On Up" and "We're a Winner" and other things like that, and stuff later in his solo career. And he always kind of kept that at the forefront. But yeah, I think they were aware of it. I think they wrote him deliberately. I don't know if they were aware of the impact that it would have, because it's always a gamble, when you're writing it.
Yeah.
But they got on a roll. He got on a roll and just kind of kept it going. And there's a nice balance, because it's not all social justice songs when you listen to an Impressions album. There's plenty of songs about love and girls and dancing and things, and having a good time, but it had a nice little sprinkle in there, and it just, that's that. I think that for me personally, that's more effective.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree. I agree. Scott Shea's our guest, a music historian. Been with us before. We're talking about Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield. The two of them, I mean, band breakups are legendary, and it's always fun to pontificate a bit about, well, what if? What if they had gotten back together? What do you think would have happened with the Impressions and Jerry Butler, kind of coming together again and, recapturing some of this wonderful music that Jerry Butler was just about?
I don't know. I mean, they did get together for a one-off concert in '73, and I think they toured in the early '80s. They had a reunion, but as far as getting together as like a studio thing, I just don't think that was anything any of them were interested. You just can't really recapture that magic, and they both had just their careers were just going real strong. It's nice to get together just in a way. Just to kind of recapture the magic at a concert, and to let everybody know. I know you're down in Virginia, and
Yeah.
there was a great bluegrass band called the Seldom Scene, and they had several iterations, but there's always like chief members and then bluegrass bands can never stay together for very long, but they would get together in like the Kennedy Center every 5 years and just have everybody come up and play in those iterations, from like the early '70s, the mid '70s, the early '80s, and fans just loved it. I wish more groups would do stuff like that. I think that would
Yeah.
be fun. It's kind of getting a little late now, but Curtis in the early '70s, when they did do a couple one-off concerts, that's the way Curtis and Jerry would go about it. But it's like I said, it's hard to recapture the magic in the studio. It just never sounds the same. So in a way, I'm kind of glad they didn't even bother with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of that it's almost a relief sometimes. You never know what the outcome might have been.
Yeah.
As a music historian, what is it about some artists, because Jerry Butler's name is left out of conversations about the greats. We hear about Curtis Mayfield all the time. You've been writing about Jerry Butler, but why is it that why do you think he was overlooked?
I think some guys just get thrown into the oldies rotation. It's kind of like, I wrote the book about the Mamas and the Papas, and
Yeah,
the
it's a
Mamas and the
wonderful
Papas
book.
had
Yeah.
had a lot to thank you. They had a lot to do with setting up what became the classic rock era. The Monterey Pop Festival. That was John
Yeah.
Phillips.
Yeah.
But their music is just relegated to when I was a kid, Light FM and the Oldies channel, never on the classic rock channel. And the classic rock, that's where all the cool kids hung out, So
Yeah.
that's where you'd hear Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and all these groups. And it's from a programming standpoint, I understand it, but I don't think it's right. It's just because it gives people a negative perception of really great artists. And I think Jerry kind of fell into that. It's like, here's a great artist, but you're not going to hear him on any kind of classic rock station or contemporary, that you would like a Curtis Mayfield or something. They're not going to write about him like they write about Curtis Mayfield. And really because Curtis Mayfield was, Curtis Mayfield gambled on writing songs about social justice, and he won.
Yeah.
Right? If he gambled and lost, it might be a different story. The world kind of went the way that he was saying we need to go. And Jerry and a lot of others didn't really do that. They were just making great melodies, great music, and just kind of appealing to a widespread audience. So I think, when it's a high risk, high reward kind of thing, and I think that's kind of where Curtis probably benefits from that, whereas Jerry doesn't, and other artists do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, Scott Shea, music historian, wrote the wonderful book, All the Leaves Are Brown, the fantastic book about the Mamas and the Papas, another one of my faves. I've always been a Motown fan, and I like a wide variety of music. Motown, almost in the same way that Curtis overshadowed Jerry a bit, Motown kind of overshadows Chicago a little bit. I mean, Chicago's a blues town. Why do you think that is? What is it so much about those two communities that are, kind of the the Northeast area, that yet still kind of, we often overlook Chicago for its powerful music vibe?
Well, Motown not only overshadows Chicago, they overshadow pretty much every other genre, a subgenre of the soul era, like Memphis and those two, because Motown was very, it was just a center of music. It was very encapsulated. It was everything was done. It was a production in house. There were teams of writers. It was a production line. That's the way Berry Gordy set it up, because he had worked in, I think it was a Ford plant on a production line, and that's how he kind of inspired him. From development to creation to distribution, it was all in house, and it had all that very similar sound that the studio sound, the background singers and the writers, and Barry did a great job of just kind of changing everything around. Like, Holland Dozier Holland, they're writing for the Supremes, but now we're going to have them write for Martha and the Vandellas, and then we're going to bring in Smokey to write for So and we could do that with the Temptations and the Four Tops, and it was very effective. So it was all very in house. It was all very encapsulated, and it's just a package deal. Where Chicago wasn't like that. There were 3 or 4 different studios, all different people doing them, different writers, different artists. Artists would come in, artists would come out. It was, Stax was probably a little bit more like Motown than Chicago was, but Chicago, it wasn't very organized. It was just, and Chicago really, I think they were just kind of happy being the blues town, because the Rolling Stones would go to Chicago to record, Fleetwood Mac would go to Chicago to record. A lot of these groups would, and I think they were happy being the home of the blues. Whereas taking on something like Motown was probably that was just a that would take a lot. So it just wasn't set up the way that Berry Gordy set it up, to just harness talent, develop it. Sam Cooke was from Chicago. The Spaniels were from Chicago. The Dells, so many others, and they were kind of each label was just kind of up to its own to figure it all out, and most of them, a lot of those labels just eventually just kind of fizzled out, whereas Motown. There's technically still around.
Yeah.
It's not the same as it was in the 60s. They moved out to LA in the early 70s and everything changed and they kind of started to sound like everybody else. But in that time period, they had a good formula and they took full advantage of it.
Scott Shea, I could talk to you for a long time. I always love your take on music and your historical perspective, all the research that you do. Congratulations on all of this work. I love hearing the names Holland, Dozier, Holland. I love talking about Gamble and Huff. Of course, it's just a pleasure to talk to you about Jerry Butler. Again, we're going to put links so that our audience can find out more about Scott and all of his work. I always say this to you, Scott, but please come back. I love talking music with you, and you just are a wealth. So keep us posted as to what's going on, and join us again soon. But my best to you, and again, congrats on all this.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Always. My thanks, of course, to Scott Shea for his time. Always enjoy talking to Scott. He is just a wealth of information and wonderful stories about the music industry. As a music historian, he knows all. My thanks to Scott. Thanks to the Smithsonian team for all their work and their support of the show. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience here on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. Please be well. Be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old, Better Show on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast.